listen-only mode.
Welcome and thank you for joining our KCI Insurance sponsored webinar today. This one is about the hours, proposed changes to hours of service by Doug Marcello. He is our expert speaker today. A quick bit about our technology. You will have your lines muted for the duration of the web seminar. You can ask questions at any time through your chat box. You can slide the chat box in and out with the double arrow or orange arrow. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Doug Marcello Esquire, a trucking law attorney and expert if you've been to any of his webinars prior. He's worked closely with the KCI Insurance web seminar series located in the Pennsylvania Trucking Hub, and he represents trucking cases throughout the country. Doug Marcello, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Alan. It's about the hours. The long-awaited, much-anticipated revisions to the hours of service regulations were released on December 23, 2010 and published shortly thereafter. The proposals, if adopted, will alter the operation of our industry and the economics of motor transportation. Today we will look at the proposed regulations, what they consist of, how they work, and talk a little bit about what effect they may have on our individual companies. We will, as we go along, compare them to the current regulations, and then also we'll talk about some of the implications to our industry, although we're very early in the process, and in future webinars we'll look more in depth at these impacts. The proposed regulations make 7 principal changes to the current regulations. These will alter and unfortunately complicate the present hours of service regulations, requiring industry adjustment and a significant amount of driver education. First of all, the hours of driving. After months of waiting and great speculation, unending concern as to whether the proposal would be for 10 or 11 hours of driving, the FMCSA finally came back with the definitive answer of yes. Now, the proposed regulations at this point are for either 10 or 11 hours of driving. It is yet to be determined with finality. However, I'll note the FMCSA states that it favors a 10-hour driving period. However, it has refrained from finality pending considerations of comments and additional data that it receives. Your comments on this issue are vital. The time is now. This is your opportunity to speak. You can submit your comments to the FMCSA on this crucial issue by electronics, by fax, by mail, or if you're so inclined, in person. For instructions on how to do so, go to the blog on our webpage, www.cdl-law.com. There are step-by-step instructions for submitting comments in either of those formats or any of those formats. Hours of driving, either 10 or 11 hours, it has not yet been decided. The next thing is what we're going to call the driving window, the workday window. The regulations retain what is called the driving window of 14 hours. And this is generally the same clock-in, clock-out period that is now applicable. However, the proposal would permit the window to be extended to 16 hours twice per week. This provision is similar to the local driver provisions and is now extended to all drivers. Now, when we say per week, not a calendar week, but is within a 168-hour period. Again, this is not recycled by a 34-hour restart. For example, if I started a 16-hour window at 6 a.m. on Tuesday morning, and then did another 16-hour window at 8 a.m., starting at 8 a.m. on Thursday morning, I could not start or do another 16-hour day until 6 a.m. the following Tuesday, 168 hours after I started the first 16-hour day. Note, this extends the workday window to 16 hours twice per week, but it does not extend the driving time or other limitations that we're going to talk about within that window. Also, one of the changes on this provision is that the driver must be released from duty after the 14th hour, not just discontinue driving at that time. Well, the next window we'll talk about is the duty time within the window, within the hours of service window. The proposed regulations would now provide a window within a window. We just talked about the retention of the 14-hour work window. Under the proposed regulations, there would be a limit of on-duty time within that 14-hour period. Drivers would be limited to 13 hours on duty within the 14-hour window. The result, while a driver has 14 hours during which he could drive, he may only be on duty for 13 of those hours. This is intended to require drivers to take a break or breaks during the workday. Also remember, while the 14-hour window may be extended 2 times during the 6 to 16 hours during a 168-hour period during a week, the 13-hour on-duty limit still applies to that 16-hour day. Thus, while a driver can extend his workday to 16 hours, he can only be on duty within 13 of those 16 hours twice a week. He will need to take up to 3 hours off duty during that 16-hour day. There is an additional regulation that would provide for drivers to be limited to 7 hours of driving after their last off-duty or sleeper berth period of at least 30 minutes. Together with the 13-hour on-duty limit, this is another requirement intended to provide for midday breaks. Note that a driver cannot drive after 7 hours from that last 30-minute break or last time off. This doesn't necessarily mean 7 hours of driving. If a driver comes on duty and starts to drive, she could then drive for up to 7 hours. However, if that same driver is on duty doing other work for 3 hours before beginning to drive, she can only drive up to 4 hours. The 7th hour after the last off-duty or sleeper berth break of at least 30 minutes. That's the imposition of this 7-hour work period. Now, planning these breaks, these 30-minute intervals, will be vital. For example, if a driver takes a 30-minute break after 2.5 hours of driving, she could then drive 7 consecutive hours to fill out the end of a potential 10-hour driving time if the FMCSA goes that route. If the final regulations provide for an 11-hour day, after 3.5-hour drivings would enable her to drive available hours during the 11-hour period. Note that a driver can remain on duty after the 7th hour, but may not drive without the 30-minute break. Reports of the death of the 34-hour restart were greatly exaggerated, kind of. During the wait, there was general speculation that the 34-hour restart would either be extended to 40 hours or eliminated in whole. Well, the good news is that there remains a creature referred to as a 34-hour restart. The bad news is barely recognizable. Any 34-hour restart must now include 2 periods between midnight and 6 a.m. Additionally, it may be only used once per week, no sooner than 168 hours after the beginning of the previously designated restart. The comments to the proposed rules say that this is intended to require drivers who regularly drive at night to, quote, obtain 2 nights of sleep. Well, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing I am. This seems to disregard the regular work-sleep cycle of these nighttime drivers. Additionally, the comments to the proposed regulations state that the 168-hour limit between restarts is intended to reduce the number of hours a driver could drive from 82 in 7 days to 70 in 7 days. The definition of on duty has been altered. Taking a valuable time while sitting in a cab at a location in a commercial vehicle while resting could in the past not be logged as off-duty. Now under the proposed regulations, there is a revision of that on-duty definition. Under these proposed regulations, the time spent in or on a non-moving commercial vehicle may be logged as off-duty. This tries to take into account those with day cabs who take a break during the day and rest in their unit. Those without a sleeper now can log this time as off-duty. Additionally, this provision provides for 2 hours of off-duty time for a team driver either before or after they spend 8 hours in the bunk. The oil field exception would be revised under this proposal. It would clarify the language on waiting time. It would also provide that waiting time would not be in calculation of the driving time window. Let's take a look at an overview of where we end up with all this. You've heard a lot of numbers. Let's try to put them in perspective. We are early in the process of evaluating and calculating the potential effects of these proposed revisions. We will post thoughts, information, and share our blog and our Twitter broadcasts, Facebook as they become available. Also, we'll put them in our newsletters. It comes out monthly. Each of your companies will have to individually evaluate the effect on your operation. Your specific loads, routes, and schedules, as well as the tracking of loads and drivers, will all need to be considered in adjusting to the proposed regulations. For now, we can at least appreciate the potential framework of a post-revision world. The structure of a driver's day would have the following framework around it. First, there's 14 hours are permitted to complete driving from the time going on duty. Again, this can be extended to 16 hours twice within a 168-hour period. Next, of that 14 hours, 13 may be on duty, resulting in a required hour of off-duty or sleeper berth time during a day in which the driver goes to the end of the 14th hour. Without a break, the driver must log off at 13 hours. And again, this 13 hours is equally applicable to the 16-hour day, requiring 3 hours of break if the extended period is taken. There will either be 10 or 11 hours of driving during the on-duty window within the 14-hour window. Lastly, a driver cannot drive more than 7 hours duty time or 7 hours after the last off-duty or sleeper berth time of at least 30 minutes. Pre-planning breaks and coordinating waits of at least 30 minutes to take advantage of the new off-duty time will be at a premium to the extent possible. Finally, we talked before about the 34-hour restart once a week every 168 hours, and it requires 2 periods between midnight and 6 a.m. Ben Hogan once said that the right way to play a golf hole is to plan it from the hole back. That probably explains a lot about my score and the lack of quality thereof. But similarly, the 34-hour restart now requires planning backwards. Let's think about this. If a driver times the start of his time off to begin by 8 p.m., he can then go back on the road after 34 hours with a restart, because by doing so, he would cover 2 midnight to 6 a.m. periods. Yet if that same driver comes in at 1 a.m., he must wait 53 hours, 23 hours just to get to the next midnight, then 30 more to include 2 midnight to 6 a.m. time periods. And you're right, it ignores nighttime drivers' regular rest rhythms and promotes daytime driving to the detriment of congestion, not to mention the effect on rest area parking between midnight and 6 a.m., which is already at a premium. Again, remember, submit your comments to the FMCSA. Time in or time on a non-moving commercial motor vehicle may now be logged as off-duty. Again, we talked earlier, the first 2 hours of a team driver spends either before or after an 8-hour sleeper berth break may also be logged as off-duty. Coordination of this off-duty time is going to be crucial to maximize its benefits particularly in light of the other regulations that we're looking at and dealing with. For example, a 30-minute wait could create the necessary off-duty time to reset the 7-hour driving period that is required under the new rules. 2 30-minute periods, or 1-hour rest period of off-duty, would serve as the 1-hour off-duty required in the 14-hour shift. Remember, the proposed regulations allow only 13 hours on duty within that shift, requiring at least 1 hour that is not on duty. The proposed regulations have numerous repercussions. Explore these in future webinars on our blog and in our newsletter. However, from an overall perspective, these provisions inject new complexity into what is currently a straightforward, understandable framework. The existing provisions of 14-hour on-duty, 11-hour driving, 10-hour break, 34-hour restart, period. Educating drivers on this complexity will be the challenge of our industry. They will need not only to appreciate the rules themselves, but also learn how to maximize the benefit of the provisions of those rules so that they can operate in the most efficient, time-conscious manner, being able to utilize the rest periods, being able to utilize either sleeper berth or wait time during which they can obtain the rest necessary to account for the time off that is required by these rules. Just as important will be the education of operations and dispatchers. They will need to work with drivers to maximize the benefit from the rules, coordinating breaks, deliveries, restarts, other provisions under these rules so that they, the drivers, and your company can continue to operate on an effective and efficient manner. This is just the beginning of the ongoing process that will culminate with the publication of the final regulations in July 2011. That date is set as required by the FMCSA's court settlement. Now is the time to voice your opinions and your concerns. Follow the ATA Hours of Service page. They will be providing up-to-date information throughout this time period in terms of changes, revisions, comments, and thoughts. Submit your comments to the FMCSA. One of the key elements that the FMCSA is looking for is the consideration to reduce the driving time to 10 hours. In doing so, the FMCSA has requested information as to accident rate during the 11th hour operation, saying there is no definitive study at this time. While it notes that the Virginia Tech study has not demonstrated an indication of lack of awareness at that time, it questions the effectiveness of that study, and at least in terms of the rules, by the sample size that was involved. Your help, your input, and your comments will be vital to meeting this challenge and helping to address the concerns of the FMCSA. Again, for your comments to be submitted, our blog contains information on how you can submit them either electronically, by mail, by fax, and again, if you would want to do so, hand delivering them. The window to make these comments is limited. We must do so now. It is time that we must speak up, address the changes, give our thoughts for changes that we may have to live with in the foreseeable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doug, for that presentation. Excellent information. And we do have many, many questions from the audience. We're going to open up the floor for that right now. And I think that there is a slide while we're waiting for that with contact information for both KCI and for Marcello and Cavisto. And while that information is up on your screen, should we not be able to get to your question today, please feel free to contact Ron Cooperman at KCI Insurance or Doug Marcello from Marcello and Cavisto. And their email addresses and phone numbers are up there on your screen. And we'll get to as many questions as possible, Doug. The first question that we have If a driver begins his 34-hour restart at midnight on Friday, when would be the next time he can begin his next restart?
He would have to go 168 hours after the conclusion of the, he has one restart within a 168-hour period. I'll double check and post it on our blog, but I believe that starts with the beginning of the restart time.
Thank you, Doug. Next question we have, does offloading a tanker truck where the driver is required to keep his engine running but the vehicle is not moving count as off-duty time?
I don't think it would. In looking at the regulations, they provide an exception for the time that a driver is in or on a non-moving commercial vehicle. However, within that same area, they don't alter subsection 5 that deals with loading and unloading as to making that an on-duty time. So I would believe that that would still be considered on-duty under the proposed regulations. And what I'm looking at right now is the definitions under 395.2. They have added the provisions for the time spent in motor vehicle that's not moving as an exception to on-duty time. But the very next subsection talks about on-duty time, including the time for loading and unloading.
Thank you, Doug. Next question we have is, when do you anticipate that the new hours of service changes will affect intrastate drivers?
I missed part of that question. Was that interstate or intrastate?
Intrastate.
It is, by their very nature, somewhat of a different concept. It would have to be primarily on a state-by-state basis on that.
Thanks, Doug. Another question that came in, would you be able to repeat the website for instructions on how to submit comments to the FMCSA?
Sure. If you go to our blog that is found, there's a link to click on it at www.cdl-law. That is our web page. There's a link to a blog, and the last blog comment up there should give you instructions as to the web page and other manners that you can submit your comments on that.
Thank you, Doug. Another question we have, will the 16-hour rule now apply to over-the-road drivers?
Yes. You have two 16-hour over-the-road commercial drivers during a 168-hour period.
Thanks, Doug. And I think this will be the last question we have time for today. Does off-duty time still mean that the driver is no longer responsible for the load during this time period?
I believe that's going to be correct. And again, the intent seems to be that to remove an automatic on-duty time from day cab drivers just because they are taking a break or resting in their cab. It doesn't change the provisions for loading or the responsibility for the load or that type of arrangement. Again, it will require looking at what can be done to both comply with that, maximize the time, and take advantage of the break opportunities as opposed to how you do the deliveries and how you set up.
Thank you very much, Doug. And I know that there are a lot of questions from the audience. One last one that I'm going to answer myself. Many people asked if a copy of this presentation will be made available, and you'll be able to go to KCI's website, kciinsurance.com, and you can view a recording of this presentation. You may also be able to download a PDF copy of the presentation. And I'm afraid that we are out of time. We'd like to thank Doug Marcella very much for presenting this excellent information, as always. And of course, we thank KCI Insurance for sponsoring today's web seminar. And we thank all of you for attending and look forward to seeing you at future KCI Insurance web seminars very soon. Doug, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate the time, and we appreciate seeing all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.